Hello and welcome to Unit 4 of our Intercession course. I apologize that this is a little bit late. The Unit 5 intro that was up is actually good. I just switched things around so that Unit 5 in the last go-round became Unit 4 in this time around. So in this unit we'll be looking at the US-Mexico War from multiple perspectives. We'll also be paying attention to the fact that in Mexico the war is remembered as the War of North American Invasion or Intervention. Those words are always used south of the border when discussing this conflict. In the United States, however, when we talk about the war, we use pretty generic terms like US-Mexico War, Mexican-American War, the War with Mexico, and so on. Invasion and intervention have a much heavier connotation. So I want you to think about why that's the case, why the war is remembered in those very distinct ways on either side of the border. Also, something that we've kind of talked about already in certain ways are the terms that are used to describe historical events. So why don't we refer to westward expansion as a conquest in the United States, in U.S. history? Why do people talk about the occupation of New Mexico rather than the conquest of New Mexico? And how has that actually furthered misconceptions about the extent to which Nuevo Mexicanos failed to resist the American presence in New Mexico? So this unit is going to, as usual, cover quite a bit. We're going to start out with Mexican independence and go from there and think about how independence impacted New Mexico specifically. One of the major ways in which Mexico's independence from Spain impacted New Mexico was in terms of relationships with nomadic native people. So those subsidies that had long been in place, or at least since the 1780s under Juan Bautista de Anza, those were funded by the crown. So there was royal money coming into New Mexico to support gift giving and trade with Comanches, Navajos, Utes, and also to support the establecimientos de paz, or the peace establishments that were established for Apache people. And as you noticed in the reading from last time, those things were imperfect, but they did keep the peace. However, when those subsidies ran out, peace also evaporated. And officials in Mexico City who had their own issues to deal with in terms of foreign debt, in terms of political intrigues and political conflicts, and we'll see this most clearly in the person of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. There was so much going on there and so many reasons for instability that when the Mexican government in Mexico City could even think about what was going on in New Mexico in the north, they generally were dismissive. They generally said, what's your problem, guys? Why can't you handle a few indios bárbaros, or a few savages, as they put it? Of course, we've deconstructed those terms, but what we're thinking about are the perspectives of the people involved at the time. Then we'll also have to think about the ways in which the Santa Fe trade started to pull New Mexico closer to the United States in terms of economics. And so while things were problematic with the government in Mexico, politically and economically, for the most part during the Mexican period, people up in the north and in New Mexico did their own thing. They were able to be left alone. However, because of the Santa Fe trade, New Mexicans found themselves drawn closer to the United States. We'll see this with Governor Manuel Armijo, as well as other rico Nuevo Mexicanos like him. A lot of people made a lot of money on the Santa Fe trade in New Mexico itself. There were a lot of people outside the kind of arenas of power in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, though, who didn't, who found themselves kind of on the losing end of the new capitalist economy that was coming into New Mexico at the time. And so animosities began there. And although most of us have heard of the Texas independence movement in 1836, far fewer of us have probably heard of the Chimayo Rebellion of 1836 and 37. Actually, I should probably say 37 and 38. The Chimayo Rebellion was kind of rooted in the same political issues on the national level in Mexico that the Texas independence movement was rooted in. Conflict between centralists and federalists, with Santa Anna becoming a centralist. He tended to be a political chameleon. In Texas, that meant an independence movement. In New Mexico, that meant spontaneous class uprising from all of those kind of outlying Genízaro townships like Abiquiu, and Anton Chico, San Antonio, those places up in Rio Arriba, that, again, the people were not benefiting from the boom of the Santa Fe trade. They also did not like the imposition of new taxes and an outside governor from Mexico City on New Mexico, and so they pushed back. All these things were going on right before the U.S.-Mexico War began. And although there were certain people who seemed to invite the Americans in, as you'll notice, there was active resistance to the American presence during the war. It was a war. People in New Mexico were fighting as best they could. We'll think about some certain categories that one scholar has used to describe resistance to the American presence. He's given us a whole kind of spectrum of different ways that people could manifest their resistance to the American presence. Finally, we'll round up this unit by looking at the imposition of the border physically on the ground and some of the problems that created for people here in terms of choosing whether or not they wanted to remain in the United States or whether or not they wanted to reassert their Mexican citizenship by moving south. But also the border itself is problematic. Choosing the Rio Grande, known as El Rio Bravo del Norte, or the strong-headed river of the north, essentially, was a poor choice. People in the area knew very well that the river repeatedly and regularly changes course. So to establish it as a border caused certain towns to all of a sudden go from being in Chihuahua to being in Texas or New Mexico, and vice versa. So we'll have to think about the impact of that as well. So hopefully this is a good intro to what we'll be talking about this unit, and I hope that you enjoy Unit 4.